A light rain pattered against the windows of City General Hospital as Helen approached the reception desk, carefully holding a folder of documents yellowed with age. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the chill of the winter morning, but from the pain radiating from her swollen knees, the legacy of decades spent on her feet in a textile factory. At 62, Helen's face bore the marks of a life dedicated to work and family, but her eyes still shone with a serene dignity that time had failed to erase. "Good morning," she said to the receptionist, a young woman with her hair tied back, who didn't look up from her computer screen. "I need to reschedule my appointment with the orthopedist. My boss wouldn't let me leave work at the scheduled time." The receptionist sighed loudly, as if the request were a personal burden. "Ma'am, the next available appointment is in December. That's a 4-month wait." Her words were mechanical, devoid of any trace of compassion. Helen felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she didn't show it. She simply nodded, as if accepting yet another stone on an already steep path. "Okay," she murmured, putting the documents back in the folder. "Thank you." In the waiting room, some people watched the scene with the quiet discomfort that arises when we witness everyday injustices. A young woman with a child in her arms looked away. A middle-aged man pretended to be engrossed in his newspaper. A nurse hurrying down the corridor quickened her pace. Everyone knew it wasn't right, but daily life had trained their hearts to indifference as a protective mechanism against the pain of others. Helen walked to a bench near the window and sat down slowly, each movement calculated to avoid awakening the pain sleeping in her joints. She took a small, faded photograph from her bag, her 8-year-old grandson smiling in a park. It was for him that she worked every day, saving penny by penny to pay for the education she herself never had. The tears that threatened to well up were held back with the same determination that made her wake up at 5 every morning. The morning wore on heavily. Helen watched the hospital's activity. Hurried doctors, overworked nurses, patients like herself, resigned to waiting. There was no anger in her heart, only a gentle sadness, like someone who knows the taste of disappointment well. She thought about giving up, about accepting that pain would be her companion until the end of her days. But the image of her grandson playing in the park kept her there, waiting for some miracle that seemed increasingly distant. Then a soft voice broke the silence beside her. "May I sit here?" Helen looked up and saw an elegant woman with gray hair, pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a white coat that spoke of decades of experience. Her eyes were kind, but carried the wisdom of someone who had seen much pain and learned to transform it into compassion. "Of course," Helen replied, making room on the bench. The woman sat down with the same gentleness of someone who understands that small gestures can carry great meaning. "I'm Dr. Lorena," she said, extending her hand. "I've worked here for 30 years. I saw you talking to the receptionist earlier." Helen confirmed with a shy nod. "I was trying to reschedule an appointment. I couldn't leave work at the scheduled time." The doctor nodded understandingly. "And now you have to wait another 4 months?" "That's what she said," Helen murmured, trying not to sound complaining. "But I understand. I know you do what you can with what you have." Dr. Marina studied Helen's face for a moment, as if reading an entire story in the lines etched there by time. "How old are you?" she asked kindly. 62. "And where do you work?" "At the textile factory, for 40 years." The doctor closed her eyes for a moment, as if making a silent calculation. When she opened them, there was a serene determination in her gaze. "Come with me," she said, rising. Helen hesitated. "I don't want to cause trouble, doctor. I can wait." "You've waited long enough," Dr. Marina replied, extending her hand to help her up.
40 years working, contributing to society, raising children, paying taxes, you have the right to be treated with dignity. The people in the waiting room began to observe the scene with curiosity. Helen felt her face flush. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. But there was something about the doctor's voice that inspired confidence, a kind of authority that didn't come from positions or titles, but from a heart that still pulsed with indignation at injustice. They walked down the corridor together, Helen trying to keep up with the doctor's firm pace. They passed the reception desk, where the receptionist finally looked up from her screen, surprised to see a patient accompanied by one of the hospital's most respected doctors. "Dr. Marina," the young woman stammered, "is there a problem?" The doctor stopped and addressed the receptionist with the same kindness she had shown Helen, but there was something different in her voice, a firmness that brooked no argument. "This woman needs to be seen today. I will examine her." "But doctor, she doesn't have an appointment, and the system—" "The system," Dr. Marina interrupted gently, "serves people, not the other way around. And this woman has proven over 40 years of work that she deserves our respect and our priority." The receptionist blinked a few times, as if processing a new reality. Other people in line began to pay attention to the conversation. Helen felt herself torn between gratitude and embarrassment. She didn't know how to react to this unexpected kindness. "I'll make an exception in the system," said the receptionist, now with a different, more human voice. "What is the lady's full name?" "Helen Silva Santos," she replied, still in shock. While the receptionist typed, Dr. Maria turned to Helen. "Do you know why I do this?" she asked. "Because people like you are the backbone of this country. You work quietly, build families, pay your taxes, never ask for anything in return. And when you need the healthcare system you helped sustain, you're treated like an inconvenience." Helen felt her eyes welling up. These weren't tears of sadness, but of an emotion she couldn't name. It was as if, after decades of being invisible, someone had finally seen her. "Doctor," she murmured, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Dr. Marina replied. "Just promise you'll never again accept being treated as if you're worthless. You are valuable, very valuable." The conversation had attracted the attention of others in the hospital. A gentleman waiting in line approached and said, "Doctor, you're right. My mother went through the same thing last week." A nurse passing by stopped and nodded in agreement.
Gradually, a small crowd formed, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a human need to witness moments of justice and compassion. And here, dear friends who follow me, I need to pause our story to share something important with you. You know that stories like this, which show the power of compassion and human dignity, are rare to find these days. So, if this narrative is touching your heart, if you believe we need more moments like this in our lives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That's how we build together a community that values kindness, empathy, and justice. And now, let's continue with the story of Helen and Dr. Maria, because the best is yet to come. Dr. Maria led Helen to her office, a simple but welcoming room with plants in the windows and family photographs on the desk. The walls were decorated with children's drawings, patients who had been there over the years, each carrying a story of healing and hope. "Have a seat," said the doctor, indicating a comfortable armchair. "Let's talk about your pain." Helen settled down slowly, still processing everything that was happening. "Doctor, I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." Dr. Maria smiled, a smile that revealed decades of experience dealing with human suffering. "Helen, may I call you Helen? There are a few things I've learned in these 30 years of medicine. The first is that pain doesn't choose a social class, but access to pain relief, unfortunately, does. The second is that my oath was made to people like you, not to bureaucratic systems.
She began to examine Helen carefully, her experienced hands identifying each point of tension, each compromised joint. "Tell me about your work," she asked, as she examined her swollen knees. Helen talked about the long hours on her feet, about the noisy machinery, about the repetitive movements that over the years had taken their toll. She also talked about the colleagues she had seen fall ill, about the disability retirements, about the dreams she had put away in a drawer to give better opportunities to her children and grandchildren. "You have advanced osteoarthritis," the doctor diagnosed after the examination. "We need to start treatment immediately. Physical therapy, medication to control inflammation, and some changes in your work routine." "Doctor, but I need to work," said Helen, worried. "And you will continue working," replied Dr. Maria, "but with dignity and without unnecessary pain. I'll talk to your boss if necessary. You have labor rights that need to be respected." While preparing the prescription, the doctor continued, "You know, Helen, there's something that deeply bothers me about this country. We treat our seniors as disposable, as if your experience and wisdom were worthless. But you are our living memory, our pillars." Helen listened to these words with a heavy heart. How long had it been since she felt valued? How long had she not been seen as a whole person, with dreams, fears, and hopes? "Dr. Maria," she said, "you don't know me. Why are you doing this for me?" The doctor stopped writing and looked into Helen's eyes. "Because my mother was like you. She worked her whole life in a factory, raised 5 children alone, never complained. When she got sick, she was treated like a number, like an inconvenience. I promised myself I would never let that happen to someone else on my watch." Emotion filled the room. Helen began to cry, not out of sadness, but out of a deep gratitude that wouldn't fit in her chest. Dr. Maria approached and held her hands. "Cry, Helen. Cry for all the times you swallowed your pain, for all the humiliations you endured in silence, for all the times you felt invisible. But from today on, you are no longer alone." Outside the office, news of what had happened spread through the hospital corridors. The nurse who had witnessed the scene at the reception told her colleagues. The gentleman who supported the doctor in line shared the story with other patients. Gradually, a wave of reflection took over the hospital environment. The receptionist who had treated Helen with indifference approached the office when they left. "Mrs. Helen," she said, in a very different voice from that morning, "I apologize for the way I treated you. It wasn't right." Helen looked at the young woman and saw in her eyes a sincerity she hadn't noticed before. "It's okay, dear," she said kindly. "We all have bad days." "But that's no excuse," the receptionist insisted. "Dr. Maria is right. You deserve respect. I'll try to be better." Dr. Maria smiled and placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "This is how we change the world, dear. One act at a time, one person at a time." In the following days, something extraordinary happened at the hospital. Helen and Dr. Maria's story became a symbol. Staff members began treating patients with more care, especially the elderly. The administration, initially resistant, realized that the shift in attitude improved not only patient care, but also the work environment. Helen returned to the hospital for her physical therapy appointments, but now she was received as someone special, not because of privileges, but out of respect. Her story had touched hearts and changed perspectives. The pain in her knees began to subside with proper treatment, but more importantly, the pain in her heart, that feeling of invisibility that had plagued her for years, also began to heal. She walked with her head held high, not out of pride, but out of recovered dignity. 3 months later, Helen received an unexpected visit at her home. It was Dr. Maria who had a proposition. "Helen, I'd like you to participate in a project we're developing at the hospital. We want to create a support group for elderly patients, coordinated by people who truly understand their needs." Helen was surprised. "But doctor, I don't have the education for that." "You have something far more valuable," the doctor replied. "You have life experience, empathy, and the ability to understand the pain of others. Those are the most important credentials anyone can have." And so Helen became a key part of the hospital's new project. Her experience helped other patients navigate the healthcare system with more dignity. She became a bridge between doctors and patients, translating technical language into words of compassion, transforming cold procedures into moments of humanity. The project was a success. Other hospitals began implementing similar initiatives. The story of Helen and Dr. Maria spread, inspiring change in many places. Not because it was widely publicized, but because it touched hearts and changed lives, and people with changed hearts transformed the world around them. The factory where Helen worked also underwent transformations.
Her story reached the ears of management, who implemented improvements in working conditions and created a health support program for their most experienced employees, not out of benevolence, but out of recognition that dignity at work is a right, not a favor. On a cold winter morning, exactly 1 year after their first encounter at the hospital, Helen and Dr. Maria met again on the same bench in the waiting room. But this time, they were there by choice, observing the hospital's activity and chatting about life. "Dr. Maria," Helen said, "sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if that morning had been different, if you hadn't sat down next to me." The doctor smiled. "You know, Helen, I believe some encounters are inevitable. Maybe I was just the instrument, but the force that changed everything came from you. It came from your quiet dignity, your courage to not give up, your ability to forgive and to be grateful even when the world seemed to be against you." "Still," Helen insisted, "you could have passed me by like everyone else." "I could have," the doctor agreed, "but my mother wouldn't forgive me if I had, and neither would I. You see, Helen, each of us has the power to be a turning point in someone's life. Sometimes it's a kind word. Sometimes it's an act of justice. Sometimes it's simply stopping and really seeing the person in front of us." They fell silent for a moment, observing the hospital's activity. It was different now. There were more smiles, more kindness, more humanity. The change had spread like ripples in a pond, touching lives that didn't even know the original story. "Dr. Maria," Helen said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you ever regretted helping me, confronting the system?" The doctor laughed, a genuine and warm laugh. "Helen, regret is what I would feel if I hadn't done anything. You reminded me why I chose medicine. It wasn't to serve protocols or systems, but to serve people. You gave me back my vocation." The sun began to set through the hospital windows, painting everything in a warm golden hue. Helen looked at her own hands, which no longer trembled with pain, but with a deep and tranquil emotion. "You know what I learned this year?" she said. "I learned that we don't need grand gestures to change the world. We just need the courage to do what's right, even when no one is watching. And courage," added Dr. Maria, "to accept that we deserve to be treated with dignity, and to treat others the same way." As they walked together toward the hospital exit, Helen thought of her grandson, who now saw her with different eyes, no longer as the grandmother who worked hard and complained little, but as a strong woman who had confronted the system and helped change it. She knew she was leaving him a slightly better world, an example that kindness still exists and that it's worth fighting for. As they passed the reception desk, the receptionist, now a different young woman, transformed by the experience, waved to them with a genuine smile. "Goodbye, Mrs. Helen. Goodbye, Dr. Maria." "Goodbye, dear," they replied, knowing that that farewell carried much more than courtesy. It carried recognition, respect, and the promise that humanity would continue to prevail over indifference. Outside, the light rain had stopped, and the sky opened up in shades of orange and pink. Helen took a deep breath, feeling in her lungs not only the fresh afternoon air, but also the sensation of a life that had found a new purpose.
"Thank you," she said to Dr. Maria, but this time not just for herself. She was thankful for all the people who would come after, for all those who would benefit from the change that had begun that cold winter morning. Dr. Maria smiled and hugged Helen. "Thank you for reminding me that medicine is, above all, an act of love." They said goodbye at the hospital entrance, each going their own way. But they knew their destinies were forever intertwined, not only by the friendship that had been born, but by the certainty that they had been instruments of a larger transformation. Helen walked home with firm steps, no pain in her knees, but mostly no pain in her soul. She knew tomorrow would be a new day, full of possibilities, in a world where she had learned that her voice mattered, that her dignity was non-negotiable, and that small acts of courage could move mountains. And so, in the simplicity of an ordinary morning, in a city hospital, two women proved that change doesn't come from grand decrees or fiery speeches, but from the daily decision to treat each person with the respect and dignity they deserve. They proved that a hero isn't someone who wears a cape, but someone who stands up when they see injustice and does something to change it. The story of Helen and Dr. Maria continued to echo through the hospital corridors, the city streets, the hearts of everyone who heard it. Because true stories, those that spring from genuine compassion, never truly end. They multiply, transform, inspire other stories, other gestures, other transformations. And so, maybe, just maybe, the next person to make a difference is you, who read this story and decided that you too can be a turning point in someone's life. Because ultimately, we all have the power to be the Dr. Maria in someone's life, and we all deserve to find our own Dr. Maria when we need it most. The rain started again outside, but now it was a different rain, no longer cold and indifferent, but comforting and hopeful, as if the sky itself were blessing that small revolution of kindness that had begun on a hospital bench and was now spreading across the world, one person at a time, one gesture at a time, one heart at a time.